My name is Christine Iptoma, and I am mom to Osteoangel Dylan and Director of Scientific Programs at MIB Agents. And today on OsteoBites, we are talking with our friends and colleagues, Dr. Lee Helman and Chelsey Blanks from the Osteosarcoma Institute about OSI Connect. Thanks so much, Dr. Helman and Chelsey, for joining us on OsteoBites today. We are thrilled to have you. And thank you also to our panelists, Kayla and Andrew, for joining us today. Both Andrew and Kayla are on our MIB Agents Junior Advisory Board. A little bit more about our guest today. Lee Helman has been studying the biology of sarcomas and caring for pediatric patients with sarcomas for over 30 years. Dr. Helman completed his postdoctoral training at the National Cancer Institute, and he then became head of the Molecular Oncology Section, Pediatric Oncology Branch at NCI in 1993. He served as chief of the Pediatric Oncology Branch from 1997 to 2007 and served as the scientific director for the clinical research in the Center for Cancer Research at the NCI from 2007 to 2016. He joined Children's Hospital in Los Angeles and the University of Southern California in 2017 as the section head of the Basic and Translational Research within the Cancer and Blood Diseases Institute and the Division of Hematology, Oncology, and Blood and Marrow Transplantation. And he remains an adjunct professor at CHLA. He has also trained many investigators in the field of pediatric sarcomas over the course of his career. And I will say that Dr. Helman is kind of like the Kevin Bacon of sarcoma in that there's like 6 degrees of separation, or probably even less, between Dr. Helman and many scientists studying osteosarcoma. He's currently focusing on improving outcomes in osteosarcoma as the director of the Osteosarcoma Institute. And we also have Chelsey Blanks, who is the Osteosarcoma Institute Operations Manager. Chelsey schedules meetings for the board, oversees various operational aspects of the organization, including HR, IT, and office management, and she facilitates the grant cycle and manages OSI Connect. And although Chelsey is Texan through and through, she spent 6 years living in Southern California, where maybe there was like another 6 degrees of separation with you and Dr. Helman there. I was thrilled to return to the homeland with her husband, Jordan, at the end of 2019. Chelsey obtained her undergraduate degree from the University of North Texas, where she studied sociology, philosophy, and dance. And prior to OSI, she had an insurance and financial services career and was an executive assistant for her church in Orange County, California. So welcome, Dr. Helman and Chelsey, and welcome everyone joining us today. Please feel free to add any questions you have as we go along for Dr. Helman and Chelsey to the Q&A, and we'll make sure we ask those. And before we get started, we have some announcements and reminders. Registration is now open for our Factor Conference, June 22nd to 24th in Atlanta. You can find the agenda and the list of speakers on our website. We are going to have 6 scientific sessions this year on biomarkers for risk stratification, preclinical models, comparative oncology, local control, immunotherapies, and molecularly targeted therapies. And this year, something new, we're going to have 3 small breakout discussion groups. The first is going to be Researcher's Best Friend conducts expedite bench to bedside for pediatric patients. And then a second discussion group on leveraging computational biology to accelerate discovery in osteosarcoma. And then the third discussion group is going to be on turning pain into power, patients with osteosarcoma who enable research. And we're going to be talking about how we engage patients to power research with their data and samples. And then in addition to the scientific sessions, we have Warrior HQ, which is free to osteo warriors and their siblings 18 and under. And we also have our wellness track for families, which will include sound healing, which is backed by popular demand, painting, classical music appreciation, flower arranging, yoga, emotional healing, and much more. So many reasons to attend Factor this year. And just to plug, we had our May Turbo, which is our tumor review board for osteosarcoma, just yesterday. And we're adding a special June 14th meeting as we weren't able to accommodate all the cases that were requested this month. So clinicians are welcome to submit a case for the June meeting. You can just email me at christina@mibagents.org for more info. And researchers are always welcome to join to hear about real-world clinical challenges. All right, so OSI, not only are they our guests today, but they are also our episode sponsor. And if you're not familiar with OSI, it is a nonprofit organization led by osteosarcoma experts from top U.S. cancer centers who together are concentrating on the cure for osteosarcoma. The mission of the OSI is to dramatically increase treatment options and survival rates in osteosarcoma. through identifying and funding the most promising and breakthrough osteosarcoma clinical trials and science. And in addition to advancing research, OSI also provides a free resource called OSI Connect, which we're going to hear all about today from Dr. Helman and Chelsey. So before we hand it over to them, Andrew, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Andrew Basaga. I'm an osteo warrior. I was diagnosed in 2018 with osteosarcoma in my femur. I went through 8 months of MAP therapy and a bone resection, and I was declared NED, and I have been for 5 years, and I'll be graduating high school in a week and attending Creighton University.
And Kayla?
Hi, I'm Kayla Owitz. I'm a rising junior at Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts. I'm majoring in health science, and my connection is I am very good friends with President of MIB Junior Advisory Board, Vicky Hoy. And I will pass it on to Dr. Helman and Chelsey.
As Christina did a wonderful job introducing us, my name is Chelsey Blanks. I am the operations manager at the Osteosarcoma Institute, and one of my many roles is to administrate OSI Connect. Administrating this resource is the hardest and yet most rewarding part of my job, and it is the only time that I actually interact directly with patients and families. And so before we jump in, I would like to thank the Osteosarcoma Institute would like to thank this audience for their time and commitment to learning more about OSI Connect. We greatly appreciate MIB. We value their mission and enjoy any opportunity where we get to work together for the osteosarcoma community. So we greatly appreciate this opportunity to share and to just get to know your community better and learn more about osteosarcoma together. So as I mentioned, put any questions in the chat. We are happy to answer them. No question is too big or too small. And Dr. Helman, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Chelsey. First, Christina, you embarrassed me with your introduction, but thank you very much. It was lovely. And Andrew, I want to say you just made my day because it makes me so happy when I see survivors working hard to help others, and really, really grateful. And I'll last, before I start, just say, I feel like we're first cousins of the MIB group. Anne is one of my heroes, Anne Graham. So we love you guys, and we hope to continue to work with you. We established the OSI in 2017. It sort of evolved from something called the Quad W Foundation. The Tishners lost a son to osteosarcoma while he was in college. And Quad W stood for what would Willie want? Their son's name was Willie. And what he wanted is to help do better in osteosarcoma. So they first found this foundation probably in the early 2020s or 2000s. And they've done a lot, but they still hadn't gotten much done in the way of new clinical trials. So they felt that they should now work to establish an institute that would really focus on advancing the science and also funding novel clinical trials. And really, we all feel the same way. Failure isn't an option, so we have to do better. So our strategic advisory board is comprised of world-renowned experts and researchers, and probably many of you have talked to them over your course if you have osteosarcoma. And as Christina mentioned, we just want to find a cure, we want to find a cure to osteosarcoma, and we believe deep in our DNA, we have to collaborate, innovate, and translate. And so we've committed over $5 million to clinical trials, correlative studies, and translational studies to date in 5 years. So, but we want to expand and have much more to do in the future. Next slide. So I'll have to say our mission, Christina gave it beautifully. Thank you, Christina. This is just a picture of our last strategic advisory board meeting. We have 2 board meetings a year. This happened in October of 2022. And above is everyone who was at the meeting. And Katie Janeway, Alejandra Sweet Cordero, Rich Gorlick, you probably, many of you have talked or heard from them. And the bottom group are the people that were by video. On the bottom left is Bill Tapp, who is an adult medical oncologist who's also a real expert in treating sarcomas and has a big interest in treating osteosarcomas. And as you know, osteosarcomas can occur in young adults and even 30-year-olds. So we're really happy to have the diversity of expertise in our group. These are some of the patients, and I just put this up because you guys are why we exist. I can't tell you how many nights of sleep I continue to lose being frustrated by the fact that I'm still treating patients today the way Andrew was treated, as he mentioned. And we've been using that treatment since I was a first-year fellow in 1983. So we know we need to do better. And patients and families are why we exist.
All right. Well, I am going to dive into an overview of OSI Connect. So this is our free patient resource to connect patients and families with osteosarcoma expert physicians to ask questions at a time when patients need it most. It connects patients with groups offering other kinds of support for their treatment journey, and it is also available in English and Spanish. We started this program in 2019, and it was driven by our Strategic Advisory Board, which Dr. Helman spoke a little bit about. We felt there was a need to provide additional free access to osteosarcoma expert physicians for patients and families to get support and to try to answer the questions that they may have. Currently, Dr. Helman takes all the English-speaking calls, and Dr. Alejandro Sweet Cordero takes the Spanish-speaking calls. So we want to continue to communicate that we are a resource that is bilingual. Our entire website and OSI Connect form is actually translatable in many different languages, but we can also take calls in Spanish as well. So OSI Connect is our free, easy-to-use resource dedicated to supporting osteosarcoma patients and their families. This resource connects those affected by this devastating disease with expert physicians to answer questions about all aspects of osteosarcoma, including treatment, possible side effects, and advice for getting the most out of your doctor appointments. The support, resources, and medical knowledge we offer are primarily focused on those seeking treatment in the United States. While our support for those seeking treatment international is limited, we're happy to help as much as we can. So we are limited by, various different countries. Every country has different situations that they're dealing with. And so we do focus mostly on the United States. But to date, we have supported over 70 osteosarcoma patients and families from all over the U.S. and many different countries, including the UK, Brazil, Germany, China, Serbia, Denmark, just to name a few, Cuba. So we have helped many families and patients in various different places, but we are really focused on the United States and what support we can offer here domestically. So a little bit about how it works. First, you will submit an online intake form. You will complete the confidential form on our website. We'll have a link for it here shortly, so just hold on. You'll complete the link on our website to share information about your osteosarcoma diagnosis or recurrence. This takes about 10 minutes, but it is very helpful for our team to be able to provide you with the best answers and assistance so that we can understand your case a little bit more. The next step is to upload your medical documentation via our secure Dropbox. So upon completion of the form, you'll get an email, and in that email, you will receive a link to our secure Dropbox storage saving device, IT lingo, and that is where you can safely and securely upload the patient's most recent imaging report and pathology report. We always want to make sure that we specify both reports, not just one or the other. So it is really important for Dr. Helman and myself to understand a little bit more about the patient and exactly what's going on so that we can provide the best support and kind of know the best history for the patient. So that is really significant and important. And honestly, that's where a lot of people forget this step. So this is super important. If you're going to use our resource, don't forget this step. This is really significant. So then you'll get the information emailed to you, and then we kind of start the process there. And then within a week, you'll hear from us. So once you upload your medical documentation, you will hear from us about scheduling and arranging a phone call. That really depends on time zones, availability, travel, sickness, hospital stays, chemo, all the moving parts are at play, but we work very quickly to at least try to communicate with you within a week, and then we start talking about what the best timeline is to have that phone call. And we have gotten quite a few. Our traffic is increasing, which is very exciting. Dr. Helman and I are constantly talking about specific cases and situations, so if you have recently reached out, you are in our list and we are reaching out to you. So we are always looking for ways to improve. So I'll explain that here shortly as well. And then the last step of the process is that you get to speak with an osteosarcoma expert. As I mentioned before, our English calls are handled by the one and only Dr. Lee Helman, and our Spanish calls are handled by Dr. Alejandro Sweet Cordero. You get to talk with one of our osteosarcoma experts for guidance about the treatment of osteosarcoma as well as resources. OSI Connect does not provide medical care or specific medical advice, mainly because these physicians aren't actually laying hands on the patient. So this is really an opportunity for Dr. Helman and Dr. Sweet Cordero to just talk about things, provide some insight, but it's not technically specific medical advice. Dr. Helman, do you want to elaborate on that at all?
Sure. The first thing I try to do is provide support. Usually it's to a parent, but I try to provide support. And, one of the things I've learned over my career is if you're a family in crisis, having a child being treated or having yourself being treated with osteosarcoma, you want to make sure you're not missing something. And so I try to make sure that is the case. And if it isn't the case, what resources we can provide or some, direction we can provide. So I'll go into that more in a little bit.
And then lastly, we treat all information confidentially as described in our privacy policy. That's on our website and tied to our OSI Connect form. So Lee, this is for you.
Yes. So I put up here some of there are millions of questions. I can't tell you how varied they are because each person is unique. Each patient is unique. Each family is unique. But these are a few common things among many other questions that come up. A child or a patient has just developed metastatic disease in the lung. And they're, of course, in crisis. They talk to their doctor and then they call and, what do we do next? What are the right things? What should we be thinking about? I try to support and give as much advice as I can. Other times someone will say, we just want to know about clinical trials. Without all the standard treatment, what clinical trials are available? And can you help? That's something I think we can do a pretty good job of. As Christina said, unfortunately, not unfortunately, but I'm fortunate enough to know people all over the world, really, doing clinical trials. And often we can just go through clinicaltrials.gov. Sometimes, if a patient is interested in a clinical trial, I'll even call the PI of that clinical trial and go through the things and see how feasible it is. Another common question is, my doctor just recommended treatment X. Is this the right thing to do? Should we get a second opinion? And one of the things I always tell patients is the first and one of the most important things when you're going through this very difficult situation, or I tell the family that, is you have to trust your doctor. If you don't trust the doctor, you should get a new doctor. Really and truly, I mean that. But certainly your doctor should not be averse to asking, he or she, I would like to get a second opinion. We might recommend someone, they might recommend someone, but you just want to make sure you're getting all your questions answered. And one of the other common questions is, I read about something online, should we try this? And there I can be helpful. Sometimes these are not really scientifically reviewed. Sometimes they're not available, but sometimes there's a clinical trial that they read about. And so we try to help in all of those situations. Next slide, Chelsey.
Dr. Helman, do you ever talk to the oncologist directly, or are you mainly talking to the patient and caregiver?
I have on occasion. It's pretty rare. I will always tell a patient, I'm happy to talk to your physician, but it's been pretty rare. I can think of a couple times that's happened. And I should, since you asked that, Christina, I want to make sure anyone that has a question, please fire away, because we can stop. And we're here to be helpful first and foremost. So if anyone has any questions while we're going through this, please fire away.
Christina, are there any others so far?
Not just yet.
Okay.
But I think a lot more. Yeah, but I know you guys are kind of still going through your presentation, and
maybe just
and more people, thank you, will probably address their question in your slide. So Well, that's kind of in that too.
Maybe just one last point, and I'll get to this, but sometimes I just tell a family, you're doing everything right. You're in a great place. You're doing everything right. And that, you like to hear that sometimes too. So next slide, Chelsey.
And actually, Dr. Helman, can you, because I know there is kind of a fine line between giving medical advice, like Chelsey was saying, versus, and so I guess in terms of what people should expect, it's more you're helping them navigate their decision making as opposed to actually giving them.
I mean, I'm a doctor to my core, and I would never make recommendations without, as Chelsey said, laying hands on a patient. I need to examine a patient, and I need to examine them. I also need to, I get reports of x-rays, but I like to look at them myself with the radiologist and go over and ask questions. So I wouldn't give specific, you should get this, but I would say occasionally, I'm not sure this is the right treatment. And we'll come to some of those when I go through some examples. But yes, I think what you said is exactly right. I'm trying, first and foremost, we're trying to be supportive, helpful, provide information. But if I really think someone's going down the wrong pathway, I might suggest they think about getting a consult, and I might suggest someone to talk to, or I might, so it just really depends on it. But I am far and away the most common are if I can help someone, if they're really looking for new clinical trials because they've exhausted all treatment that we know has some effect, we can provide those. And like I said, sometimes I may call the PI of that study and say, we just had a referral. We've referred many patients to clinical studies through this consult service. Take it away, Chelsey. Go ahead.
We have a question in the chat, and that is, can we suggest autologous DC therapy as preventative measures of relapse or recurrence, metastasis in OS patient?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the very beginning. Autologous? Was that what?
Yes, I'll repeat the question, and it's also in the Q&A. Can we suggest autologous DC therapy as preventative measures of relapse or recurrence?
I think you mean autologous dendritic cell therapy, I think is what the question is. Yes. And I would say, I worked on this back in the early 2000s, trying to use peptide pulse dendritic cells for treating, actually in this case, Ewing sarcoma. I would say at the present time, it's experimental therapy. And we're working hard to see how to make it work. But as of the present time, we don't know how to make it effective at the current time. And certainly, I would not recommend it as a preventative therapy at this time. But we would love to figure out how to make it work. It's a good question.
Okay, we ready? No more questions so far? Okay, well, I will take a little bit and talk about our OSI Connect form. We have a QR code or the direct website for you right here. And the photo on the left or the right is actually from our website. So you can recognize that image when you go directly to the website. So last summer, we updated our OSI Connect process to make things easier for patients and families. Everything is online with much more automation, and it's much more user-friendly. So we have been very, very excited about the improvements that have been made. And we are constantly looking for ways to continually improve because there's always room for improvement. And as of this month, the OSI has actually hired a new administrative assistant who will be focused on additional OSI Connect improvements and will support Dr. Helman and I behind the scenes with things for OSI Connect. So we're looking forward to that because we have helped over 70 patients to date, and we are hoping that number continues to grow as we continue to reach more and more osteosarcoma patients. Dr. Helman is going to take a minute and talk about 2 recent case studies.
Yeah, so I just thought I'd give a sort of a sampling of a couple of recent discussions we've had because they sort of represent different parts of the spectrum. The first I'll discuss was a 20-year-old young woman who was diagnosed in December of 2022 with a large tumor in around the nape, which is the most common site we see. And she was being treated because she was 20 years old. She was being treated at an excellent hospital, academic hospital. But because there was a children's hospital almost next door, there was no pediatrics in that hospital. So she was being treated by a medical oncologist who was taking care of patients with sarcomas, and she was doing fine. She had some issues with her initial therapy. They adjusted it, and from looking at everything, she was doing well. But because they were next door to a children's hospital, and I happen to know two of the people that were focused specifically on osteosarcoma, I suggested to the mother, you may want to either call, and if you wanted to do that, I could make an introduction, or ask your doctor, would he be willing to talk to the osteosarcoma experts at the pediatric hospital? Because with rare exceptions, I mean, Bill Tapp, he's at Memorial Sloan Kettering. There are doctors at MD Anderson that are medical oncologists that see many, many cases of osteosarcoma. But in general, pediatric oncologists see many more cases of osteosarcoma than do medical oncologists. So that was a suggestion. I told them, so far she's doing great. Everything your doctor has done is reasonable. But if you have some concerns, because she had concerns with some of the adjustments the doctor had made in the therapy, and even had a question about what the surgical approach was going to be. So I just made a recommendation that they have a fantastic pediatric hospital almost a block away, and we gave them the names and suggested they might want to talk to those doctors. So that's one kind of thing where I feel I can be supportive and yet suggest they may want to talk to other people in their same community. And I know from a pediatric point of view, we will never say no if a medical oncologist calls up to ask us about a more common pediatric tumor. So the second was in some ways a little bit easier, but on the other hand, it was difficult. This was a 15-year-old male who was diagnosed in April of 2022. But he presented with a tumor again in his knee, but also had pulmonary lung metastasis at the time of being at presentation. He was being treated in, I would say, one of the 4 top pediatric oncology hospitals in the country. But he had high-risk disease when he came in, and he had failed standard treatment. He had failed first salvage therapy. He did not want limb salvage. He wanted an amputation, so that's what was done. And they were just asking, was what their doctors recommending at the time reasonable? And I happened to know what they were recommending, and it would have been something I would have recommended to them as well. And I basically wanted them to understand that, this is why we have so much more work to do, but that your son has got the best care possible currently. And I think that just gave some peace to the mother and father. So those are, sort of extremes of the kinds of questions we get and what I try to do. I should mention, before, and Chelsey can confirm this, before I take a call, I look through the information that's provided, the X-ray reports, the intake form, also as much of the doctor's notes that they send us. And if I have questions, I tell Chelsey, I need to get this information because I can't be helpful talking unless I know this. And so usually, like I said, I can't review the X-rays, but I do review the reports in chronological order, and I go back as far as they will send us the information, because the more I understand about the course of the disease and knowing all the therapy they previously received, the more helpful I can be in trying to steer them in directions that could be helpful to them. And of course, sometimes one of the first things I ask a family or a patient is, if you live in, whatever neighborhood you live in, are you willing to travel? If so, how far are you willing to travel? Because if they say, well, we're on the East Coast and we'd like to, if we're going to go somewhere, we'd like to be closer to home. And that helps me just, try to make referrals to maybe clinical trials that are going on. And some families will say, we'll go anywhere. So then but it really depends on working with the family or the patient to what they want. But Chelsey can tell you, I won't take a call until I get all the information possible, because I don't like to start a discussion unless I feel I truly understand what the situation is. And I start every call. I ask them, and Chelsey kind of laughs because it's the same each time. I go over the history as I've written it down myself, all of the results of the scans, where they are, what's been recommended, what they previously had. And then I say, please now correct, or did I get it right? What did I miss? And sometimes there's a piece I missed, like someone had a second surgery of another pulmonary resection that I couldn't find in the record. So I always ask after I go through it, did I get it right? What did I miss? So that before we really start the discussion, I think I totally, fully understand what the status of the patient's disease is at the time we're having the discussion.
Yes. You want me? I'll keep going.
I think that's
I will elaborate on that Dr. Helman, I will brag for him because he may not brag for himself, he is incredibly thorough and elaborate when he is reviewing these cases and really trying to understand each patient. He wants to know the nuances, the specifics, and really understand each patient. And as we said a couple of times, we can all agree to this. Each patient is different. Each story is different. Each case of treatment is different. And so he truly wants to understand what makes that specific patient so unique and different, and how we can be best helpful. And as he also said, if there's things that don't make sense or they're still missing gaps, we will get those questions answered before we even hop on a phone call, so that Dr. Helman is most prepared and it can be the most helpful phone call. And it's not just a bunch of back and forth. We can take care of some things via email before we even hop on the phone. And that really is a wonderful piece of just the attentiveness that Dr. Helman takes with each one of these calls, because it is a one-on-one situation. It is personal to that patient. Every phone call is different, and he really does he practices what he preaches, and he walks the walk. And so I'll just say too, with these case studies that Dr. Helman mentioned, with the first one and the 20-year-old female, we didn't just go as far as saying, oh, here's the name of the pediatric hospital right next door. I actually found the bio of the physician that Dr. Helman recommended, sent it to the family, and also included a direct link to their sarcoma center at the pediatric hospital, so that they could reach out directly and get some of the questions they wanted answered. Dr. Helman said he would have been happy to call that physician and make an introduction. They weren't quite ready for that yet, but we equipped this family with as much information as possible so that when they're ready, they can reach out and they're not having to go to Google. It's in their inbox waiting there for them. And so that is one of the things that we do as well, is after the phone call or during the phone call, I'm actually taking notes and processing and writing things down that are significant. Dr. Helman may be recommending a trial on clinicaltrials.gov. Well, I'm on the website finding the NCT number and preparing it. And then I send that to the family afterward so that they're equipped. And so it's not just those kind of things, but we also send a resource email to each family. And that email is specific to each individual situation. So we really do take that very, very seriously. I have like a dictionary of resources at this point. But so that is kind of one of the next things that we do with this process. My slide is not going to there we go. The final piece of this process is that a day or two later, I send an email full of resources that are specific to this situation. So for example, if we've learned that the patient had an amputation, then I'm going to send a couple of organizations that are specific for amputations. We always send them MIB. Almost always they come from MIB or back and forth, but that is always on our list. But we have, this is from the article that we had on our blog, The Frontline. The link is down below if you'd like to find the entire article. But these are some of our more just general, I can send these to any family, any patient that's fighting osteosarcoma. And whether they were diagnosed yesterday or 7 years ago, these organizations are helpful. But it's small things like some of the organizations that we work with or that I know about, they only support patients up to 18. Some do 15 to 39. So it's all about finding the right mix. And then I try to find specific organizations in their backyard that they don't even know exist. So maybe a local organization. One time I sent a family the link to the AYA room at their hospital they didn't even know existed. So there was an AYA room in the hospital they were attending and they didn't even know about it. So just those kind of very unique touches that families are very overwhelmed when they're getting these diagnoses and when they're in the hospital and everything is happening. And so we want to make it easy. So it's not overwhelming. It's only about 6 to 8 resources that are specific to them. And this is kind of our general resource library here on the slide. But when you go through this process with OSI Connect, we dig a little bit deeper and try to find things that are most helpful for that patient and family. And so that is one of my favorite parts, is truly listening to what the family or the patient needs. Sometimes it's financial. We've had patients ask about school support, all sorts of different things. And so we dig and do a little research to find try to fill the specific gap that they're looking for. So these run the gamut. These resources run the gamut, as I've mentioned. And we also provide other services like house cleaning. That's cleaning for a reason. And things like that can fall through the wayside when you're dealing with treatment and a diagnosis like this. So if you've not heard of any of these organizations, I highly encourage you to reach out to these organizations, follow them on social media, go to their website, check out their information. So that's a little plug for MIB and the many other organizations listed here. But there really are so many resources out there. And we want to provide and equip those for our families and patients that are dealing with this. So that is a little bit about our resources and our library. I'm not sure why my slide thing isn't working.
It's going slowly for some reason, Chelsey.
There we go. Okay. So here we've got just a couple more slides left. So if you have any questions, be sure to put them in the chat. We'll have a few minutes to have some Q&A after. But these are some testimonials from families and both mothers who used OSI Connect. So feel free. One is a mother of a 13-year-old osteo warrior. One is another mother of an osteosarcoma patient, and they just share about their experience and how helpful OSI Connect was. And these families really were impacted by the support that we were able to provide. And we want to help as many patients and families as possible amidst something so difficult. We know that what all of these families are going through is awful. It's devastating. It's very, very difficult. And so we truly try to meet them with compassion and kindness and as being as helpful as possible. So working with these patients and families, it's the hardest thing that I do, and it's also the most rewarding thing that I do. So no question is too big or too small. And again, we do strive to be as helpful as possible. And if someone does ask a question, we try to find the answer. So Dr. Helman and I have gotten some questions where we're like, we'll figure that out. Give me a minute. Or they ask about something we'd never heard of before, and we do a little research and do some digging. So it's always a unique experience, and each situation is different. And so that's how we approach each one of these phone calls.
Let me just add, Chelsey, before we go on. MIB does the same thing. You guys approach everyone with compassion, and that's why we're first cousins. But one of the things that I've learned over 35 years of treating patients with newly diagnosed sarcomas or recurrent sarcomas that get referred to me. The first time I see a new patient, I go through every step, and ask for all the questions. But I've done this long enough to realize when the patient or the family and the patient get home, they can't remember anything I just told them because they're in crisis. I mean, when I have to go to the hospital for something little, like, having to get sutured up or something, I don't remember anything they tell me to do by the time I get home. And so I always tell patients, when you get home, after you've been to the doctor, write all your questions down that come to you after you forgot everything you were told. That's fine. That's normal. Don't be embarrassed about it. Just make sure you ask every question. Because we understand. And when I first started, I'd get a call and I'd go through everything, and the patient or the family would say, "We never heard that before." And I knew the doctor that had seen him before, and I knew that couldn't be true. And I called the doctor and I said, we said exactly the same thing. And I understand that now. And sometimes you have to hear things a few times. And I don't tell, fine. I just want to make sure patients and families understand their questions are fair and they should be answered. So I feel really strongly about that. It's really, really important.
I totally agree, because I think especially when you are newly diagnosed, it's like first a fire hose of information, and also just whole shock of everything and lack of sleep, right? Because you're just immediately in the hospital, woken up with the beeping all through the night and just dealing with this new reality. So I think that's a really great suggestion. And along those lines, I'm just curious, what advice do you have for families in terms of like questions to be asking their oncologists? Because, I think as the patient, as the parent and the caregivers, you're really kind of your child's best advocate.
Yes.
Right. And so, and I love what you said about, making sure that you have an oncologist that you trust. But in terms of kind of being in that partnership of the patient caregiver and the oncologist, what are some of the questions that the patient and caregiver should be kind of asking along the way?
Well, I would say first and foremost, everything. And, and if you don't understand something, just say, please explain that to me. I don't understand it. And I'm a subscriber to, I can explain anything that I truly understand. And if I don't understand something, I'm not as good as explaining it. But that means I don't understand it. So I think the first thing is to make sure you are not embarrassed if you were just told something and didn't understand what it meant. Sometimes doctors lapse into our doctor jargon. We all try really hard not to do that. But you'll hear, I'll say, it was a distal femur. And some people, I don't know what a distal, but they're embarrassed to say, well, what does that mean? Or, when I'm talking to a parent of that, or I say, it's a whatever. We try not to slip into jargon. So I would say the most important thing is make sure your questions are asked. And don't, I know it's hard. And every study that's ever been done, a physician will be asked, how did this go? And the physician will say, I think we communicated, they asked everything. And then the family will say, we weren't able to understand half of what they were saying. So, and remember too, Christina, you used the word partnership. But I want all our patients to understand you are employing your doctor. Your doctor should be working for you. You're not there to help the doctor. The doctor's there to help you. And we can't help you if we don't hear your questions or your concerns. So I think most important is to ask any question that comes to you, and to certainly not be afraid to say, I don't understand what you just said. I learned early on, I spent my whole career in medicine saying, I don't understand. Because if I didn't understand something, I didn't want to not figure it out. And if I didn't ask, I would never. I hope that makes sense.
That's great advice.
Well, we have one final slide. It is our thank you and question slide, and an additional link to the OSI Connect form where you can learn a little bit more about the process and again, kind of re-see what we've already discussed here today. But we do want to open this time up for questions. Before I officially do that, though, I also want to plug MIB Factor in Atlanta in just 6 weeks. I will be attending in person, so we hope you're attending either in person or virtually. And if you are going to be in Atlanta, be sure to find me. I'd love to say hi and connect with you in person. And Dr. Chand Khanna, OSI Strategic Advisory Board Chair, is speaking on the Factor Comparative Oncology panel, and he'll be presenting about the OSI on Saturday morning. You won't want to miss either. So you should come to Atlanta.
Well, I just want to say I'm really sorry. I love those.
I know.
Can't be there because I'm running another meeting exactly overlapping. So I was disappointed not to be able to join. But anyway.
Are there any questions that came through in the last couple of minutes?
Not yet, but everyone, please feel free to add any questions you have to the Q&A, and we can make sure we ask those. And Andrew and Kayla, if you have any questions, feel free to jump in. I might just ask, I'll maybe get us started with a couple, and that is around maybe like sequencing, and wanted to get your thoughts on sequencing and, whether or not patients should be doing that at diagnosis, and when else they should be doing that.
Well, I've spent my whole career pushing and working on genetically characterizing how important understanding the genetics of diseases is. And so I feel strongly that if possible, we should get DNA sequencing on every newly diagnosed patient. And, some of you may have heard of the Children's Cancer Data Initiative. I mean, I pushed half my career at the NCI to get that. Unfortunately, right now they're just doing, and I pushed really hard to include osteosarcoma, but it wasn't included. But there are several reasons. But at the same time, I think we have to be clear about what it can do and what it can't do. I think first of all, the osteosarcoma sequencing is incredibly abnormal. There are, instead of just mutations, what we think of as mutations, we see whole chromosomes shattered and put back together in really weird ways. It's a really unique, fairly unique feature of osteosarcoma. So the whole genome is abnormal. But still, every once in a while, we find specific alterations that either we have drugs that we can target, or we might have them a year from now. So I think knowing what that DNA looks like at the beginning of the journey is important, because if, God forbid, you then have a recurrence, we have something to compare it to when we look again. So we know this has been there since the beginning, and now it's become dominant, so this is really important. And if we happen to have a drug that we can treat it with, it's worth knowing. Unfortunately, most times we don't have a perfect drug if there is a specific mutation, or we don't have a drug yet and we're working to develop them. But every once in a while, we can find something that might add to our interest in trying a different kind of therapy. But also, what I think is very, very important is that the more we understand what we see and get larger and larger amounts of information, we can start using, and I hate to use this word, but everyone knows it, artificial intelligence. But to use artificial intelligence, you need huge data sets. And the only way we can get them is by starting to accumulate the information. And the third reason I'm a real fan of doing it at the very beginning is that rarely, but every once in a while, maybe 5, 10, 15%, there might be a germline, meaning a mutation that you inherited when you were born. And that plays a role in what we think plays a role in your having osteosarcoma today. And if that's the case, we would strongly recommend that we analyze your brothers and sisters, your siblings, because if we could have picked it up 3 years earlier, I'm a believer also that the less time the tumor has to grow, because sometimes the tumors are growing longer than we think, rarely. But if we can find a germline mutation, at least we can begin looking whether any of your family members have it. And if so, could we start looking at them very carefully to nip it in its bud, as you will, if you will. So I think those are the three major reasons I'm a big supporter of doing sequencing. Unfortunately, the likelihood that it will directly affect our ability to treat your disease today is small. It's not zero, though. And, I always tell everyone, if we say we're curing 65% of osteosarcoma, I've never met a patient who was 65% cured. Either you're cured or you're not cured. So it's 100% or 0%. So even if we say we only find, actionable mutations in 5% of patients, if you're the one, it's 100%. So I always feel like it's worth getting as much information as possible on each patient. That's a long-winded answer, but I think got the gist of it, right?
Yeah. And well, that actually kind of leads me to another question, which is, so certainly it sounds like, just to be able to increase our knowledge base and the, understanding kind of the hereditary implications. And then, what you said about also like if there is a potentially druggable mutation and kind of knowing that potentially later if there's a recurrence. So I just wanted to kind of clarify, so that when you're getting that sequencing done at diagnosis, it's not likely to affect the immediate treatment plan.
Well,
but
probably not, because, well, I can ask you, Christina, if you had a mutation that we know could be targeted and you haven't been treated yet, and we know we have a treatment that cures 70%, and this treatment is, we have not enough information to know if it has any activity, what would you do? You get the treatment that we know has better than 50% chance of curing it. But that doesn't mean it's not worth knowing if, like I said, unfortunately, you're one of the 30% or so that will recur. And then we can look at it again. And if it's still there, it means it's probably really important.
Mm-hmm. So while it may not inform, though, that first treatment plan, it could potentially inform what happens afterwards.
That's
right. So if there is a recurrence. And so I do.
That's, rare instance. And I can't think of one in osteosarcoma. But let's say you may have heard of, there's a common translocation in a gene called TRAC. So there's NTRAC translocations, commonly in a very rare pediatric tumor. But they can occur sporadically in just all kinds of weird tumors, thyroid cancer, whatever. And I've never seen one in an osteo, but if you have that translocation, our drug that targets that is incredibly effective. So you would think long and hard about at least adding that to the treatment. So I've never seen it, but you never know. I've only seen 1,000. Maybe the 1,001th will have that translocation.
So maybe two-part question. So kind of finishing that first question up about it might set you up for later, like it might give you some information that you can use later. Are there other things? Because I, do kind of think of it as like, in a chess game a little bit, right? Because you can't predict what's going to happen, but you want to be somewhat prepared for the different scenarios and trying to anticipate those things and be somewhat prepared. Because if there is progression, as you said, like sometimes things happen quickly, right? So you don't want to be all of a sudden like, oh, now what do we do? You want to have some things in your back pocket, or at least start it kind of exploring different options. So one question, I guess, is kind of recommendations for how to kind of stay on top of that and kind of be thinking about things in advance to kind of prepare for those different surprises that may happen. And then kind of second question then is about like maintenance therapy, because that is something that, after that first course of MAP is, when does maintenance therapy become something that someone should be considering?
Yeah, let me talk about maintenance therapy because it's a really good question. And I know, again, because I've been doing this for so long, when you finish all your therapy, and, right now our current therapy is 8 to 10 months in that range in general, if everything goes well, close to a year if you get delays. And then you're done. And that's a really stressful time. All of a sudden, you've spent every month for whatever it is, 8 months, 9 months. And now you say, goodbye, we'll see you in a month. And we don't, So we understand that's a really stressful time. And right now, we don't have, and people have tried certain maintenance therapies because we know it is important in childhood leukemia. But right now, there is no maintenance therapy that has been shown to be effective in osteosarcoma. And I think that's because each tumor has a different rhythm to it, if you will. Osteosarcoma in general is pretty rapidly progressing when it's diagnosed, and that's why we really push to get therapy started so quickly. But there have been a few studies trying to then maintain low dose something or other, and it's never showed to be effective. So as of now, there is no maintenance therapy. I mean, what of course we'd love to do, and we've referred a few patients, we'd love to figure out how to make the immune system do the brush up, right? To maybe have stimulate the immune system after you're done all your therapy, to maybe get some immune therapy for a while, but it hasn't worked yet. Or to use it in the middle of therapy. So I'm convinced that we're going to figure out how to let the immune system help us as well. But these are all highly investigative approaches right now.
Thank you. I can't believe it's already at the top of the hour here.
Yeah. I could talk about this for 3 days.
Well, I know, and I feel like we should be talking to you for 3 days because, we have the source here to kind of ask all these questions. So thank you. But and thank you guys also. I see you have your email address for more questions or information or any follow-up info at osinst.org. And so people can get a hold of you and with the QR code and everything. So thanks so much, Dr. Helman and Chelsey, for joining us on OsteoBites today, and for all you do, also for all OSI does to make it better for osteosarcoma patients. More information on this and all OsteoBites can be found on YouTube, on our website at mitagents.org, and at your favorite podcast place. And next week on the 18th, we're actually dropping a new episode of our Osteo AYA podcast. Osteo warriors Camille and Mia will discuss finding confidence and identity as an AYA cancer patient. And you can find it on our website, YouTube, and Spotify also next Thursday. And then we'll be back the following Thursday on May 25th. We're going to be talking to Dr. Christian Capitini. He's an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he also serves as a co-leader of the Developmental Therapeutics Program at the University of Wisconsin-Carboni Cancer Center, and he's the Director of Clinical Innovation at the Forward Bio Institute. And he's going to be talking to us about reprogramming NK cells within the tumor microenvironment of osteosarcoma lung metastasis. And you can find our OsteoBites lineup for the next few months on our website. And if you have any ideas for future topics that you'd like to hear about, please share them with us at events@mitagents.org. Thanks again to Dr. Helman, Chelsey, Andrew, and Kayla, and thanks to all of you for spending an hour with us today. We hope to see you back here on OsteoBites in a couple of weeks on May 25th when we talk to Dr. Capitini. And like Chelsey said, she's going to be at Factor, so yet another reason to come.
Yeah.
And Dr. Helman
have a great Factor.
He's going to be saving the world somewhere else that weekend. But
have a great meeting. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.